Hello, fellow developers. This is going to be a quick video about setting up Unreal Engine 4.27, 5.03, 5.2. Those are the ones I've tested to work with the Oculus Quest 2. And essentially, you can get this all from the documentation, but I'm sure lots of you don't want to read that. My in-house software team doesn't either, so every time we're staging a new workstation for Quest 2 development, I get hit up on Slack or Teams or Discord. So the solution is obviously to make this quick video, which has worked great for us. Hopefully it'll work for you. If it does, if you enjoy it, like, subscribe, leave a comment, anything to help us with the YouTube algorithm. So without further ado, let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is visit developer.android.com, and you want to download Android Studio. You need a very specific version. So obviously when you visit this, the links will be in the description as always. You're going to accept the terms, and then you are going to find Android Studio 4.0. And so you want to go through the list, ignore all the beta versions and different things like that. You can find it by the date, May 28th, 2020. So 4.0, just go ahead and download the Windows version, which is right here. You want the installer. I am not going to show that in this video. If you don't know how to install something, this video and I probably cannot help you. So yeah, anyway, install it. Once it's installed, you are going to want to go ahead and open it up. So I obviously already have it installed. I'll open Android Studio. And just as a side note, you're going to want to install it to the default location if you can, without changing the installation path off the default drive. The reason for that is Unreal has a batch file which will look for it to configure the NDK and some other things. And you might have to do some additional work if you change the installation path. So that's really up to you, but I suggest leaving it alone. So once you get Android Studio up, you're going to want to go to Configure and SDK Manager. And once you have the SDK Manager open, there's a couple of important things you want to do. So first, over here on Android SDK, you're going to see the different options. By default, it's probably going to have API 32 installed or newer. You're going to want to check Android 10.0 Q, which is API level 29. I already have this checked. If you do not, you will need to check that so it will install. And once you have that done, you want to flip over to the SDK Tools tab. And this is also important. And then click the Show Package Details option. So the SDK build tools, you also need to install additional versions. So in this particular case, you want to install 29.0.2. I also suggest installing 28.0.3. There's this weird thing where sometimes if that's not installed, you'll get an error when deploying. I don't know why that is, but this is what works. So make sure those two are checked. And then the NDK you don't want to mess with right now, Unreal will actually handle that. And then drop down to the command line tools. This is important. Uncheck any of the other options and make sure only 8.0 is checked. Unreal's batch file that runs everything will only work with the 8.0 installation. It will complain if you do not have that installed. So go ahead, install those both, and then you can exit out once that's set up. The next thing you're probably going to want is the MetaQuest Developer Hub. You don't have to have this, but it's helpful. And so you can just download this. I'll put the link in the description from the site. And it's just a tool to manage the Quest, turn on wireless ADB access, things like that. I highly suggest it. You can also do all of this through alternate means. You don't have to use this tool, but you can. So once that's handled, you are going to need to run the Android setup batch script that comes with Unreal Engine. The location of this is going to depend on where you actually install the Unreal Engine. So in my case, I am going to go to the folder I have for 4.27. I'm going to jump into Engine, and then you want to go into Extras, and there's an Android folder. So in here, you are going to see the setup Android batch script. You can run it directly by double clicking it, or you could do what I do, which I personally like to get a command prompt open and then just navigate to the path. So CD there, and then you can go, set up Android.bat so you get better output and it doesn't auto close. This one actually has a pause to continue function, but it's a good habit to do that. So yeah, it'll run through. Yours is probably going to take a little bit longer, and it will tell you that it's installing a version of the NDK, which is what you want. My version already has it, so it doesn't matter. And then you can go ahead and exit that. And then once that's done, you want to fire up Unreal Engine. I'm using 4.27 here. Again, this works with 5.02 and 3. I also tested it with 5.2. I do not suggest using Unreal 5.03 nor 5.2 at this point for Quest 2 development. That is an entirely different video, but if you are not up to speed, certain features like Nanite and Lumen and very core features that handle the way meshes are rendered in Unreal Engine 5, which are amazing, by the way, do not yet work on the Quest 2. Who knows if they will in the future? The hardware's not the most powerful. We really don't know. I'm sure with the recently announced Quest 3, things will be different with that updated processing chip that it has, which is supposed to be twice as powerful. Regardless, at this point, I highly suggest sticking to 4.26 or 4.27 for Quest development. Again, this will work. I have done this and tested plenty on 5.2, and the performance is just not there. Regardless, get your project open, start a new project, however you want to handle it, and then drop into your project settings. And these are not really necessarily in line with all of these with getting it to actually launch, but these are things you need to do anyway for general performance. So let's just cover them. So first, under Engine, jump into Rendering and make sure to disable vertex fogging and mobile shaders. And then for mobile MSAA, you want to do 4 times. Enable software support for Gaussian culling, and mobile AO I like to turn off. There's a whole different subject, but it's performance related. So you want to go ahead then and drop down, make sure Gaussian culling is turned on. Texture streaming can be on. This doesn't really work properly on the Quest right now, but regardless, I like to turn it on. For your reflection capture resolution, by default, this is going to be double this, or maybe even 512. I like to drop it down to 64. This does have some effect on reflections, but it is much more performant. You can adjust this based on your project, but 64 is where I like to start. Forward shading, flip it on. Doesn't really matter for Quest 2, but it's good for PCVR. And obviously you want to allow static lighting. Drop down, and down here under VR. So for HMD fixed foveated level, this is an Oculus setting. It affects the way that foveated rendering is performed. If you are not up to speed with how that works, basically it lowers the resolution or blurs areas outside the center of the focal point of the user. This increases performance greatly on scenes that have performance issues. It does the great quality around the edges of the image. I leave it disabled. Depending on what you're doing, you can adjust that. There's some great resources on the Oculus developer site that explain this and have some images. Regardless, I'm leaving it disabled. You can adjust it to your needs. Instant stereo, turn it off. Mobile HDR, turn it off unless you are using crazy post-process effects that need certain outlines and things like that. But this is a huge performance drain, so I highly suggest turning it off. And then you want to make sure mobile multi-view is on. I like to turn on round robin occlusion queries. This helps. You can flip it on. And then custom depth with temporal AA jitter, flip that off for performance. Under the default settings, bloom AO off. You can turn on AO with static fraction, aka AO for baked lighting. It's not necessary. Auto exposure, you want that off. Motion blur, get rid of it. It looks terrible in VR. Lens flare, if you want to check this, you shouldn't be a developer anymore. Opinion aside, turn it off. So anti-aliasing method, MSAA, and then drop down under optimizations. You can leave render on built preview shadows in game. It's helpful. And then from there, most of this other stuff does not really matter when it comes to working with the Quest. So let's drop down then under platforms to Android. And when you do that, you are going to have a button up here. Mine says platform files are writable, but yours is going to say configure now. You want to hit configure, and you should get this green indicating that it is configured. And you may also need to click accept SDK license. If you haven't, you should do that. Down here, you want to, your package name, you want to put something there. So com dot your studio name dot project name. Then under minimum and target SDK version, you want 29 for both of these. This is the current standard for Quest 2 and the Android version on it. So go ahead and do that. And the important one, make sure you check package game data inside APK. That is important. And then you want to jump down here. So by default, you're going to see support ARM v7. I unchecked that, and support ARM 64 for the Quest 2. This has performance gains. For general compatibility, you can leave ARM version 7 only on. Checking both tends to cause an issue at build time. Who knows why? But yes, I would suggest going with ARM 64. Down here, open GLES 3.1 is the standard. Vulkan works under certain conditions. You can check it and use it. Does have performance improvements with certain materials and texture options. I use it for most projects, but for default testing, I do not. Then down under your advanced APK packaging, you will want to expand the package for Oculus mobile devices, and then click this little, right here, click this little add element, and then select the Quest 2, and remove Oculus signature files from distribution APK. I turn that on, so click that. You can also add extra tags to the manifest. These are really more for final deployment versus for development. Although under extra permissions, you may need to add read and write external storage if you're using saving and things like that in your test environment. But in a general situation, these are important for deployment, not so much for testing. And these can be found on the Oculus documentation for the Quest 2 and Unreal Engine. So yes, you want to do that. Next, we'll go over to platforms and Android SDK. This one's important. For SDK config, it will try to auto-detect the location of your SDK and NDK files. If it doesn't, you need to set these. So by default, it's going to be your users folder, username, app data local, Android, and SDK. You want to point it to the path where the SDK folder's at. You do not want to point it inside any other subfolder. So if I open that path, if I go to Android, you'll see SDK. This is where it's pointed to the main folder where all the subfolders are located. And then for the NDK, it's similar. This should auto be configured because it installs it. But under SDK, there's an NDK folder. And then there's the version. And that's the one you want, the folder path that includes the version number. So that is the one that Unreal picked for this particular project version. And then for Java, the JDK, again, this path should be auto-detected, but if you've changed the default Android Studio path, it will not be detected. So in my case, that's exactly what happened. And if we navigate to that folder, you'll notice this is my program files, Android Studio at my installation path. And then there's a JRE subfolder, and that is where we're pointing it. So make sure that is set correctly. And then for the SDK API level, you can leave this to latest, and then Android 21, this is set by Unreal. So both of those will be set. You can leave those, and you are almost done. So now the last thing you want to do is under launch, you are going to want to open the project launcher, and then you want to connect your Quest via cable. So you need a USB-C to normal USB for your computer, depending, or USB-C to C if your computer has a USB-C port. Regardless, connect it. If you use the Elite Strap on your Quest units, like we do for development, you need to unplug the Elite Strap battery cable and plug directly into the side port on the Quest 2. Otherwise, this will not work. Once you do that, you'll need to probably accept in your Quest the prompt to allow access. And then after that, you are going to want to look right here where your Quest 2 appears, and in the project launcher, click Advanced, and next to it, Variant, you can click ASTC, Config Development's fine, and then Data Build, you want to set this to by the book. So if you leave this to on the fly, it will launch the project faster, but it will continue to compile data. As the headset is running the project, this leads to weird issues, performance, and then also you have to remain tethered while you do that. If you switch this to by the book, it will basically build and cook all of the information, send it over, install it on the Quest 2, and then you could disconnect it and actually relaunch the project later independently and still test it. I highly prefer this. Takes a little bit longer the first time, but it works later. Also, if you are wirelessly connecting the Quest with wireless ADB, which is an entirely different video we're going to do, you have to use this option. Otherwise, it will not work. So just make sure you do that. And then you hit launch, and that's it. It takes a while the first time. It will launch on your headset, and you are good to go. After subsequent changes that you make, it's a lot faster when you relaunch it, but really that's all you need to do. And just to give you a quick overview, the reason why we suggested the Quest Developer Hub is actually this. So I'm going to pull it up, taking advantage of the fact that we have this connected. And if you pull up the Developer Hub and go to Device Manager, you will see that the Oculus Quest 2 is listed, and you can actually see all the apps that are installed. You can control a bunch of functions on the device, including capturing screenshots and media from it. But you can also trigger the metrics HUD, recording, the profiling services, trace analysis, which is very useful. And then you could toggle some other things over here. So it's kind of important to note that you can enable ADB over Wi-Fi, which if you do this, you can also do this via side quest or a different, with a phone or a different alternative. But the official way right here, you flip this on, and then you will be able to actually use ADB and wirelessly connect the Quest and then launch from Unreal Engine that way without physically connecting it. This is very helpful. I personally do this. I've had no delays or performance issues doing it this way, but this is the main reason why I like this aside from metrics. So that's something to take into account. And this is where you do it. This is a free tool from Oculus. It takes a few seconds to get it set up and going. So yeah, I highly suggest that. There's also a performance analyzer built in, which is pretty phenomenal, honestly, in real time when you're testing a project. So something else I would consider utilizing. I do not use the in-engine tools for Unreal for debugging performance on this particular platform because the actual tools built in to the Quest Developer Hub are far superior. Obviously, they have much better access to the hardware and the statistics because it's built by the people who made the hardware. So yeah, essentially, I highly suggest using this for that reason. But regardless, you are now set up. These same steps, again, apply to other engine versions. The exact same Android Studio version is actually what you'll use. If you're using 5.2, for example, the NDK version it downloads is a little different, but since Unreal handles that automatically with the setup Android script, it really doesn't matter. So yeah, basically this will get you going. Happy development, and be sure to check out our other videos, which I'm going to be uploading on how to set up wireless, ADB for use with Unreal Engine, and then some more basic optimization tips and tricks and just different things we do here in-house for our projects. And they've worked wonders, so I'm glad to share those with you. So yeah, keep an eye out, like, subscribe, and thank you for the watch.